"You can't stand there," the CEO said, voice sharp as broken glass. "This terminal is for executives, not janitors. By the way, where are you watching from? Tell me in the comments below, because this story will deliver the public humiliation, the runway crisis, and the moment a mocked single dad forces a billionaire to recognize him." The worker didn't flinch. One hand rested on a mop handle. The other held his son's small fingers. Behind the CEO, security stood in a perfect line. Investors and senior staff turned to watch, half curious, half entertained. She looked him up and down, pausing on the scuffed work boots. "How did you get past to the front desk? One mistake in here costs more than your yearly paycheck." A few people laughed, the kind of laugh that wasn't joy, just permission. He gave a small nod, calm, not surrender, just control. The boy tightened his grip. "Dad?" "It's okay," the worker murmured, keeping his tone steady. He didn't use her name. He didn't offer his own. In places like this, names were for people with access. Security stepped forward. The CEO pointed toward a glass door marked "Authorized Only." "Move him to the service corridor and take the kid with him, now." He guided his son away without arguing, past the glossy lobby and into the narrow gray corridor lined with carts and locked panels. It was the place power never looked, the place meant to stay invisible. His name was Evan Holt. The badge on his chest said Janitor, Night Shift, and nothing else. He was 38, widowed, and raising his son on a budget that felt like a tightening fist. The boy beside him was Noah Holt, 9 years old, small for his age, carrying a backpack with a hospital bracelet tucked in the front pocket like a secret. Evan wasn't here for the CEO's big demonstration. He was here because Cross Dynamics funded a shuttle flight program for families with long hospital appointments, and Noah's cardiac imaging slot was that morning. Missing it meant weeks of delay, more uncertainty, more nights of Evan counting money he didn't have. Noah glanced back. Why was she mad? Evan crouched beside him in the supply alcove. He straightened Noah's collar and wiped a smudge from his cheek. "Some people think uniforms tell the whole story," he said. "They're wrong. But we don't need to fight them today." Noah nodded, trying hard not to cry. Evan felt the familiar pressure behind his ribs, the kind that came from loving someone more than the world felt safe. An intercom chimed, cheerful and rehearsed. "Cross Dynamics demonstration begins in 30 minutes. All authorized personnel to positions." Through a small window at the corridor's end, Evan could see the hangar. The prototype jet sat under white lights like a trophy, surrounded by technicians with tablets. Somewhere out there, the CEO was smiling for cameras, selling certainty. A mechanic hurried past, muttering into a headset about a ground sensor that wouldn't stabilize. Another tech jogged behind him with a tool case, eyes too wide. Evan's gaze lifted to a ceiling monitor that showed basic telemetry. Mostly green, a few amber icons flickering, then steadying. He told himself to look away. He told himself those numbers weren't his job. He pushed his cart forward and kept cleaning, mop gliding across the floor in smooth strokes. But his attention stayed split, the way it used to when stakes were measured in seconds. He watched the warning pattern like a man recognizing an old scar. Noah sat on a folding chair, feet not reaching the floor, watching Evan with quiet trust. Evan kept his breathing even for Noah's sake, because fear was contagious. A low vibration rolled through the building, the distant whine of turbines spooling. The jet was starting its taxi sequence. The monitor flashed once, quick enough that most people would miss it. Amber, then another. A stutter in a subsystem that shouldn't stutter. Evan's pulse didn't race. It sharpened, like a switch snapping into place. He wrung out the mop and looked again, unable to stop himself. More amber icons appeared, a cascade beginning. The intercom cut from cheerful to strained. All personnel, stand by. We have an anomaly on CDX-9 taxi. Repeat, anomaly on taxi. Noah's head lifted. Dad, what does that mean? Evan's jaw tightened. He stared at the screen as warnings multiplied, and for the first time all morning, the calm mask slipped just enough for Noah to notice. It means, Evan said quietly, already thinking 3 steps ahead, someone's about to learn that status doesn't fly airplanes. He set the mop aside, squeezed Noah's shoulder, and walked toward the operations door, knowing security would try to stop him again. He reached the operations door before anyone realized the janitor wasn't supposed to move that fast. His hand closed around the handle, and as he pulled it open, a high security guard stepped into his path, palm raised, expression flat with authority. Sir, you can't. There's an active systems cascade on that jet, he said, keeping his voice level. If someone doesn't intervene, you'll lose more than a demonstration. The guard blinked, caught between instinct and confusion. Evan didn't look threatening. He looked like a man carrying a mop bucket 5 minutes ago. But something in his tone, measured, controlled, cut through the guard's training. Before the guard could form a reply, a second intercom alert blared. Sharper, urgent. CDX-9 reporting additional control irregularities, requesting guidance. In the operations room, people rushed between consoles. A woman in a technical vest grabbed a headset, barking instructions that didn't sound confident. The CEO, half hidden behind tinted glass in the VIP gallery, had her phone pressed to her ear, posture stiff. She wasn't smiling now. Evan tried to step forward, again, but the guard held firm. You'll need clearance. I don't need clearance, he said quietly. I need 10 seconds to look at your telemetry. Another alert chimed. The technicians flinched. The sound wasn't routine anymore. A critical warning pulsed red on the nearest monitor. Noah hovered behind him, clutching the strap of his small backpack. His voice was small. Dad, is it bad? Evan didn't turn. Stay right by me. The guard hesitated at the sight of the child, then looked back at the spiraling data. Logic competed with protocol, and protocol started losing. Inside the operations room, a supervisor called out, "We're losing left rudder response. Manual override isn't engaging." That sentence cracked through the guard's certainty. He stepped aside. Evan didn't waste time. He moved into the operations center with the same quiet stride he used for cleaning. Except now his eyes weren't on floors, but on the patterns flashing across. Multiple screens. Telemetry feeds scrolled in columns. Control surface data jittered in places that should have been stable. Evan leaned closer, scanning the values with unsettling familiarity. He didn't have to guess. He recognized the failure signature like handwriting from a former life. A software patch conflicting with analog stabilizers. A tension loop in the hybrid control architecture. A feedback pairing that could lock out pilot authority within minutes. He kept his breathing steady, letting the room's panic wash around him without touching him. "Sir, this is a restricted zone," the operations lead snapped when she noticed him. She rushed over, tugged off her headset. "Where's your badge?" He pointed toward the screen showing the leading-edge flap reading. "You can't regain control using your current sequence. The patch you installed yesterday corrupted the backup authority. You need a staggered reset, not a forced override." The lead froze. The technicians turned. "How do you know that?" she demanded. "Because the CDX-9's architecture is based on the Air Force's AP-series stabilizer array," he said. "And that's exactly how those systems fail before full lockout." Silence. Heavy, charged, skeptical. Someone scoffed. There's no way a janitor knows military grade. Another alarm cut him off. Louder. The jet icon on the monitor shifted from amber to blinking red. Noah flinched at the sound. Evan placed a calming hand on his son's shoulder without breaking eye contact with the technicians. Valeria Cross stepped out of the VIP gallery above, her expression hardening as she scanned the chaotic room. "What's happening? Why aren't you stabilizing it?" The operations lead swallowed. "Ma'am, we're trying every protocol." Evan spoke before she could continue. "You're using the wrong ones." The CEO's gaze dropped to him, the same gaze she'd used hours earlier, measuring, dismissing. "You again? Why is he in here? Get him out." "Your daughter is on that jet," he said, tone unshakable, "and you're 30 seconds from losing full authority." Her mouth snapped shut. The room held its breath. "You don't have to trust me," he continued, "but look at the telemetry. Your left rudder oscillation is in a runaway loop. The stabilizer sync is misreporting. And your pilot can't correct because the system won't obey until it's decoupled." One of the technicians bolted to a console, fingers flying across keys. His face drained. He's right. The system's ignoring manual inputs. The operations lead stared at him again, this time not with suspicion, but fear. "What do we do?" she asked. He stepped closer to her console. "Authorize me to assist your flight crew. I'll talk them through the sequence." Valeria crossed her arms. "And if you're wrong?" He didn't blink. "Then the aircraft loses control on the runway, with your daughter on board." A technician turned. "Ma'am, we have no viable alternative." Seconds passed. The CEO's jaw clenched hard enough that her muscles twitched. Finally, "Fine, let him speak with the cockpit." The operations lead handed him a headset. He put it on without ceremony, voice dropping into a cadence he hadn't used in years. "CDX-9, this is operations support," he began, eyes fixed on the numbers. "I need you to listen carefully. We're initiating a staggered system decouple. Acknowledge." The cockpit responded, tense, uncertain, hanging on every word. Noah watched his father like he'd never seen him before, and for the first time, the operations room believed the janitor might not be a janitor at all. Subscribe with the bell on because the next part of this story is about to get even deeper into the crisis that exposes everything hidden. The headset settled against his ear, warm from the last operator, and the room fell into a strained silence. Evan kept his eyes on the telemetry as the cockpit acknowledged his call. The pilot's voice crackled through, tight with adrenaline. "Operations support, Captain Reyes here. We're reading your advisory. Go ahead." Every technician leaned in as if drawn by gravity. Even Valeria, rigid and pale, stepped closer, hands clasped at her waist like she was trying not to shake. "Captain," Evan said, steady as level flight, "the system's stuck in a hybrid conflict loop. You need to isolate the backup authority. Begin by disengaging the secondary channel. Only the secondary. Do not touch the primary feed." Reyes hesitated. "You sure? That's not in any of our protocols." "Correct," he said, "because the failure you're facing wasn't accounted for in your certification procedures." He didn't add the rest. It wasn't accounted for because the patch that caused this conflict wasn't supposed to be deployed this early. Someone in Cross Dynamics had rushed it. One of the technicians hissed through her teeth as she realized the same thing. Valeria stiffened, but said nothing. "Captain," Evan continued, "disengage secondary now. You'll see a spike, then a drop. Don't panic. Wait it out." A loud beep echoed through the operation room as the pilot performed the sequence. The monitors showed the predicted spike, sharp, alarming, and Noah grabbed his father's sleeve. "Is that bad?" the boy whispered. "No," Evan murmured. "It's what should happen." The spike fell, stabilized. Then an amber icon flicked back to steady. The room exhaled all at once. Even Valeria's shoulders lowered half an inch. Reyes's voice came through headset again. "Stabilizer reading is cleaner. Authority is partially restored. What's next?" "Next," Evan said, "you're going to regain control of your rudder. That'll give you directional authority. Then we move to flap control." The pilot muttered something relieved, something prayer-like, before answering. "Standing by." A young technician approached Evan, nervous. "Sir, how do you know this architecture? The CDX-9 system specs aren't public." Evan didn't look away from the screen. "I've worked with similar systems before." It wasn't a lie. It wasn't the whole truth either. He pointed to a set of fluctuating numbers. "If you pull the wrong feed, you'll invert the rudder response. Captain, wait for the left bank oscillation to settle. Then disengage the tertiary servo." A pause. "Copy. Waiting. 3 seconds. 5. Tertiary disengaged. We have rudder response. Partial, but responsive." Technicians clapped and then stopped as if unsure whether celebration was allowed yet. The intercom chimed again, but not the same panicked tone as before. This alert came from the tower. "All personnel, CDX-9 has regained partial control. Runway remains closed. Stand by for further updates." Noah looked up at his father with eyes shining in awe. "Dad, you sound like you've done this before." Evan ruffled his hair gently. "Once or twice?" A voice from the far end of the room cut in. "Ma'am, another issue." It was Marcus Red, head of the flight division, breathless and flushed. "The telemetry freeze earlier? It wasn't just a glitch. The system logged a false clear before the cascade. That means the software patch wasn't validated." Valeria's jaw worked. "Explain." "It wasn't ready for deployment," Marcus said quietly, "and if that man," he pointed at Evan, "hadn't caught the loop, we'd have lost the jet." The CEO didn't look at Marcus. She didn't look at anyone. Her gaze locked on Evan like she was seeing him properly for the first time. Not the uniform, not the badge. Him. And for the first time since morning, she didn't have anything to say. Evan tapped a command key lightly. "Captain, I need you to test manual pitch control. Slow, deliberate taps. Do not hold." Reyes complied, calling out incremental responses. Pitch authority 20%, 30, 35. But then a new alert blared. Red, not amber. A warning no one wanted to hear. The leading-edge flap reading dipped dangerously. Reyes cursed. "We're losing flap control again. If it drops further, we can't attempt any maneuvering." The room's fragile calm shattered. Evan leaned forward, scanning the numbers, but his posture stayed even. He spoke into the headset, voice precise. "Captain, listen to me carefully. We prepared for this. It's part of the same system conflict. You're going to bypass the automated routing completely. Use manual direct control. Switch 3, then 7. 7 bypasses the entire stabilizer net. Yes, which is why you must be ready." Another technician whispered, "That's insane." "No," another corrected softly, "that's military." Valeria's eyes widened, almost imperceptibly. "Captain," Evan repeated, "on my count, 3, 2, 1, bypass." The monitors flashed, warnings screamed. Then, just as quickly, they went silent. Every blinking red stopped. Every reading turned stable. Reyes breathed out, shaking. "Control restored. We're stable." The room erupted again, louder this time. Technicians clapped shoulders, someone cheered, and even Marcus leaned forward against a console, overwhelmed with relief. Valeria didn't cheer. She stared at Evan like her world had tilted in a way she couldn't yet process. He removed the headset slowly, letting the final reading settle into a safe pattern. Only then did he speak. Quiet, certain, unshakable. "Your pilot can fly now." Noah's hand slipped into his, small, trusting, anchoring. The operations team moved into rapid after-action mode, shouting instructions, coordinating with the tower, preparing for the jet's next moves. But all attention still drifted back to the janitor who wasn't acting like one. Public exposure had begun. Not loud, not dramatic, just undeniable. Evan turned toward the window overlooking the runway as the jet inched forward under regained control, the engines humming low and steady. The calm before the next reveal. The one none of them were ready for yet. He whispered to Noah, "Stay close, things are about to happen fast." And they would, because now the entire room needed him more than they understood. Evan kept his hand on Noah's shoulder as they stood at the window overlooking the runway. The jet's engines rumbled in a steady rhythm now, no longer sputtering with the erratic warnings that had filled the operations center moments earlier. But the tension in the room hadn't eased. If anything, it sharpened, tightening around every breath and every quiet footstep. People weren't watching the jet. They were watching the man who had just dragged it back from disaster. The operations lead stepped beside him, still gripping her tablet like a shield. "We've confirmed stabilization across primary systems," she said, half speaking to him, half reporting to anyone listening. "But the flap issue could resurface if the system enters another sync attempt. We need a controlled circuit before we let anyone relax." Her voice wavered at the last word. No one felt comfortable using it yet. Not with the CEO standing nearby like a shadow cast across the entire room. Valeria circled the consoles, her gaze sliding to the telemetry display, then to Evan, then back again. She looked like she was assembling a puzzle she wasn't ready to admit she didn't understand. The pressure in her jaw made the lines around her mouth stand rigid. Her daughter was still on that aircraft, strapped in for what was supposed to be a polished demonstration flight. Now it was a test of survival and reputation. And the janitor she'd mocked was the only reason the jet hadn't become a headline. Captain Reyes' voice came over the speakers. "Operations CDX-9, preparing to taxi for controlled circuit, awaiting clearance." The tower responded with rapid instructions, clearing traffic and shutting down non-essential movements. Emergency trucks positioned themselves discreetly but visibly at the runway's far edges. The entire airport shifted around the crisis like a heartbeat adjusting to stress. Evan watched the jet ease forward, its sleek frame catching the light in a metallic glint. He spoke low, so only Noah could hear. "If anything changes, they'll need more than a bypass sequence." Noah didn't understand the specifics, but he understood the tone. He nodded, jaw set like he was absorbing some invisible weight from his father. A janitor's child should have looked out of place in a restricted terminal. But he didn't. Not next to the man who'd taken command of a crisis more complex than anyone present could handle. Marcus Red hurried toward them, his tie askew, sweat darkening the collar of his shirt. "Ma'am," he called to the CEO, "the regulators want real-time confirmation on the flight log. They're asking for a responsible engineer to sign off on the recovery sequence before the jet takes off again." Valeria froze. There was no responsible engineer. Not one who had predicted, understood, or corrected what had happened. Her gaze flicked to Evan reluctantly, as if acknowledging him meant forfeiting some internal battle she was losing. She approached him with that hesitation barely concealed. "You're..." Guidance stabilized the aircraft, she said, choosing each word as if selecting a tool she wasn't familiar with. But a controlled circuit requires risk assessment and clearance. Evan didn't turn to her. His attention stayed on the telemetry screen. Your system will fall back into conflict if the routing tries to self-correct. The circuit is safe as long as the pilot follows the manual path I gave him. His calm grated against her pride, but the truth held more weight than ego. She swallowed. If something goes wrong, it won't, he said, unless someone overrides the bypass. The operations lead stiffened. We'll lock out automatic sync. Nothing touches that feed without your approval. Evan nodded once. It wasn't authority he wanted. It was competence, and competence had already chosen its side. The jet lifted from the runway, wheels retracting with a clean motion that made a ripple of relief pass through the room. Noah pressed his forehead to the glass, breath fogging the lower corner. He's really flying, the boy whispered. Evan kept his stance firm, eyes tracking the aircraft as it banked into its first turn. Data streamed across the monitors, smooth, steady, predictable, the rhythm of a machine that finally understood who was guiding it. But partway through the second turn, a sudden tremor hit the stabilizer readings. A flicker, subtle but unmistakable. Evan leaned closer. There. That's the loop trying to re-engage. The operations lead paled. But we locked the sync. You locked the primary path, he corrected softly. But the tertiary monitor is still listening. It's trying to reconcile input it shouldn't see. Reyes's voice came through again, tension slicing every word. Operations were feeling a mild pull on the left wing. Confirm any system irregularities. Evan took the headset before anyone else reacted. Captain, hold current pitch and roll. Do not adjust. The system is attempting a silent handshake. I need you to freeze your current commands. Reyes didn't question him. That was respect earned, not given. The tremor steadied, the readings leveled. Evan exhaled slowly, a breath almost no one noticed, except Noah, who watched him like he was watching gravity work. Minutes later, the jet completed its circuit and began final descent. The tower confirmed landing clearance. The room vibrated, with held breath. Evan didn't blink as the jet touched down, wheels meeting the runway in a controlled, decisive contact. The roar of relief that followed shook the operations center. Every eye drifted to Evan again. Not the janitor, not the subordinate. The man who saved everything. The landing gear's hiss faded into the distance, but the shockwave of what had just happened still lingered in the operations center. People were breathing again, talking again, moving again, but every movement carried a stunned reverence aimed at the man standing near the glass. Evan didn't seek their attention, didn't lift his chin, didn't posture. He simply watched the jet continue down the runway toward the hangar, the same quiet presence he'd been hours earlier, only now stripped of invisibility. Noah edged closer to the window, pressing both palms to the glass. "Dad, you saved them," he whispered, voice cracked with awe. Evan rested a hand on his son's back, grounding him, grounding himself. "The pilot did his job," he said softly. "I just helped him see what the system wasn't showing." Inside the room, technicians began gathering flight logs, regulators scribbled notes, and tower control switched to rapid review mode. The hum of important people doing important things filled the space, but every few seconds a face turned back toward Evan, quietly recalibrating who they thought he was. Marcus Red was the first to approach him with purpose. "Sir," he stopped, corrected himself, then tried again. "Evan." The regulators want a timeline of events from everyone involved. They're asking specifically for, well, your part in it." He sounded genuinely stunned by his own sentence. Evan shook his head. "Get the pilot's account first, and the tech teams. They're the ones who'll need to answer to the investigation." Marcus frowned. "That's true, but your actions weren't official." Evan interrupted calmly. "And I'm not here to take credit from anyone." Marcus stared at him a moment longer, then nodded slowly. Respect wasn't spoken. It was inherited by the air. The jet rolled to a stop at the hangar entrance. Emergency crews stood at a distance, unsure whether to approach. For a long moment nothing moved. Then the cabin door cracked open, sunlight slicing across the interior. A staircase was wheeled into place. Lena Cross descended first. Her steps were careful but steady, her eyes wide and searching the crowd. When she saw her mother inside the operations room, she lifted a trembling hand in an uncertain wave. Valeria exhaled with a sound that wasn't quite a sob and wasn't quite relief. More like something inside her fractured and then reshaped itself. She hurried toward the stairs, but before she reached the runway door, she stopped. Her gaze traveled to Evan again. This time, it wasn't cold, it wasn't dismissive. It was something closer to fear, and gratitude she didn't know how to voice yet. In the meantime, the operations center buzzed with a new problem. A thin technician hurried toward the main screen. "We've got anomalies in the flight logs," she announced. The room froze. Another crisis? Another threat? Evan stepped closer instinctively, though he didn't touch a console. The technician brought up a recording. Data columns jittered with inconsistencies. "This pattern shouldn't exist," she said, "and the auto-validate is refusing to clear the logs." Valeria stopped at the doorway, hearing the shift in tone. "What now?" Marcus swallowed. "Ma'am, this might prove the patch that caused the failure wasn't approved." Several eyes drifted to him, then slowly to Valeria. Her expression changed, the tiniest flicker of realization, or dread, or both. The technician zoomed in on the anomaly. Someone pushed the patch through without QA sign-off. Evan watched the lines of code flash across the monitors. He recognized the markers. A rush job, likely someone under immense pressure to deliver performance metrics before the demonstration. Noah tugged his sleeve. "Is it breaking again?" he asked. "Not the jet," Evan murmured. "Something else." The regulators in the corner exchanged glances. One whispered, "This could suspend Cross-Dynamics' flight program." The CEO's spine straightened. "Marcus," she said tightly, "I want names. Whoever deployed that patch." "Ma'am," Marcus hesitated. "It might not be one person. It might be a chain of approvals, including—" He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. The implication hit the room like a silent explosion. Before the weight of that could settle, the jet's cockpit crew entered through the side door, walking straight into the operations center. Captain Reyes locked eyes on Evan immediately. "I need to meet the man who saved our lives," he said. He crossed the room in purposeful strides and extended his hand. Evan shook it once, firm but not boastful. "You gave us the only path we had," Reyes said. "No one in this room, no one in this building saw what you saw." He looked at the regulators, then the CEO. If he hadn't stepped in, CDX-9 would have gone down. Valeria stared at her pilot, unable to hide her reaction. It wasn't anger anymore. It was awe wrapped in a hollowed-out understanding. She had misjudged a man whose knowledge eclipsed her entire room of experts. A regulator approached Evan next. "Sir, we'll need a formal statement. Your analysis was accurate and instrumental." Evan gave a small nod. "I'll help however I can." He didn't notice the quiet ripple traveling through the room. A shift in posture, a shift in power. The janitor was no longer below anyone here. Someone handed him a printout of the stabilizer readings. Evan took it instinctively, examining the spread. His fingers traced a pattern in the data, and he immediately saw the missing piece. "The fault didn't start during taxi," he said softly. "It started during boot sequence, and the system tried to hide it." The operations lead inhaled sharply. "Hide it? How?" "By rerouting error signatures," Evans said. "Someone forced a premature green light." Everyone turned to Valeria. Her expression didn't waver, but her eyes did. The victory strategy clicked forward another step. Public exposure wasn't coming. It had already begun. A deeper silence settled over the operations center than any alarm could trigger. The kind that didn't come from sirens or danger, but from truth. The kind people felt in their bones before they understood it with their minds. Evan still held the printout. His thumb pressed over the forced green light signature. The lines of code stared back like an accusation waiting for a voice. Valeria took a single step forward, chin lifted, shoulders rigid. "Explain," she said, her voice even, but thinner at the edges than she intended. Evan lowered the printout. "The system didn't fail naturally," he said. "It was pushed past a warning barrier. Whoever executed that patch didn't just rush it, they buried the fault under a validation override." His tone wasn't dramatic, wasn't accusatory. It was simply factual, the calm of someone who understood machines better than the people who built them. A regulator moved to Evan's side, peering over his arm. "He's right. This wasn't a bug. This was a deliberate bypass." The room fractured into whispers. Technicians exchanged looks, some horrified, some defeated, some already calculating who would be blamed. Valeria's jaw clenched. "This company does not deploy untested software," she snapped. Marcus grimaced. "Ma'am, it does if someone in upper management demands performance metrics before a demonstration." He said it carefully, but the implication was unmistakable. Color drained from her face. But before she could respond, the tower radio crackled. "Operations, we need confirmation. Runway required for inbound traffic. CDX-9 is clear, but logs are still locked. We need a formal status." The operations lead turned toward Evan instinctively. That small movement, the reliance on him, shifted the center of gravity in the room. "We can't clear the logs," she said. "The auto-validator won't accept the pilot's manual input because of the override." Valeria nearly snapped something, but Evan spoke first. "You don't need the validator," he said. "You need an independent systems review. That's the only way to clear the jet for further testing." "But that'll initiate an external audit," Marcus warned. "The whole program could be frozen." A regulator stepped forward. "Given what we just saw, it may have to be." Panic rippled through the ranks. Careers were built on the CDX-9. Funding, promotions, prestige. A freeze would devastate half the people in the room. Evan didn't smile, but his eyes carried a quiet truth. Better a frozen program than a dead pilot. Lena Cross entered the room at that moment, guided by a paramedic. Her hair was wind-tossed, her cheeks flushed, but she was unhurt. When she saw her mother, she rushed forward and stopped short when she noticed the tension. "Mom, what's going on?" Valeria swallowed hard and forced composure. "Nothing you need to worry about." Lena's gaze drifted to Evan. "You're the one who helped us in the air." She said it with certainty. She had recognized his voice. Her gratitude went deeper than words. Valeria stiffened but didn't pull her daughter away. Not this time. A regulator raised a hand. We need to isolate responsibility for the unauthorized patch. Everyone in the room braced. Valeria inhaled sharply. You're implying this was negligence from my team. No, the regulator said. We believe the decision came from someone above them. The words landed like a blow. People looked at Valeria. Everyone except Evan. He focused on Noah, who had inched closer to him, sensing the room's shift. Evan rested a steady hand on his shoulder, grounding the boy and himself. The regulator continued. We'll begin a chain of command investigation, starting with the executive signatures on the patch request. The CEO's lips parted like a crack forming in a dam. It wasn't confession, it wasn't guilt, it was realization. She now understood exactly where this investigation was going and what it would uncover. And then, without warning, the operations room lights flickered. A technician's console beeped rapidly. The system is attempting a rollback. Marcus spun around. What? Who initiated that? No one in here, the tech said, fingers scrambling across the keys. This is a remote command. A rollback would restore the patch to its pre-flight state, erasing evidence of the override. A quiet horror washed over the room. The regulator stepped closer. Someone outside this room is trying to wipe the logs. Valeria's voice broke through the tension. Stop it. We can't, the tech said. It's locked from an executive terminal. Another blow. Evan moved toward the console. Show me. The tech stepped aside. Evan typed faster than anyone expected a janitor could. The command path lit up on the main screen, a root access string originating from a secure executive login, a login used only by the highest ranks of Cross Dynamics, a login belonging to Valeria Cross. The room froze. Even her daughter stared at her wide-eyed. Valeria shook her head once, slow, disbelieving. I didn't authorize that command. Someone spoofed my credentials. Evan nodded. Possible, but rare and not easy. He turned the printout over and tapped a pattern of numbers. This is a professional-level breach. Someone in your circle has access. The regulator whispered, This is no longer an internal incident. This is corporate tampering. The tension coiled tighter. Marcus looked overwhelmed. Technicians backed away from consoles. No one wanted to be near the digital crime scene. Noah tugged gently at his father's sleeve. Dad, what does it mean? It means, Evan said quietly, someone's trying very hard to hide what almost killed everyone. The regulator faced the CEO. Ma'am, until we determine who tampered with the system, we'll need full access to your internal communications. All of them. Valeria swallowed, eyes flickering between the regulator and Evan. The janitor she mocked was now the man everyone deferred to, the one whose credibility outweighed her authority. The victory strategy advanced again, loud and public, not through confrontation, through truth, because the person they dismissed had just become the only one they trusted. The regulator's request hung in the air like a suspended verdict, full access to internal communications. For a CEO, that was more than an inconvenience. It was the corporate equivalent of turning your pockets inside out in front of a courtroom, and everyone in the operations center felt the shift. Authority wasn't guiding the room anymore. Truth was, and the man standing closest to it wasn't wearing a tailored suit. He was wearing a janitor's badge. Valeria didn't move. She didn't argue. She didn't lash out. She simply stood frozen, as if the ground beneath her had tilted too far for her to adjust. Her daughter hovered behind her, watching with a mixture of confusion and dawning fear. Whatever confidence the CEO carried that morning, polished, rehearsed, almost theatrical, had cracked. The fracture lines spread across her expression. Evan didn't press her. He didn't need to. He knew how this worked. When systems collapsed, whether mechanical or human, the first thing to fail wasn't the metal. It was denial. Noah leaned closer to him, whispering, "Dad, are they blaming her?" He rested a hand on the boy's shoulder. "They're looking for answers," he murmured. "Everyone is." Marcus Red finally stepped forward. "Ma'am, if someone used your terminal credentials to initiate a rollback, the breach may be closer than we think." His voice shook, but not from fear of her, from fear of the implications. "We need to act fast before more evidence disappears." Valeria inhaled slowly. "Fine. Grant them whatever access they need." She sounded hollow but steady, like a pilot who'd lost an engine but refused to abandon the controls. "I have nothing to hide." But almost immediately after she said it, a technician gasped, "Ma'am, your primary terminal just went offline." Everyone turned to the wall where the executive console feeds were displayed. One of the screens, the one marked Cross XX01, flickered to black, then to a static error message. Marcus paled. "Someone is wiping her system." The regulator snapped. "Can we isolate the source?" The tech shook his head. "The signal's bouncing through internal routing. Whoever's doing this knows our architecture." Valeria took a step forward, composure thinning. "Stop it, now." "We're trying," the tech said, frantic. But the rollback wasn't just the logs. They're erasing update history, deployment records, file signatures. Someone with access, was trying to erase the chain of responsibility. Evan stepped closer to the console. "Start tracing backward from the first unauthorized rollback pulse," he said. "Every breach leaves a ripple. Follow the distortion pattern." The technician stared at him. "You mean track the access wave?" Evan nodded. "Yes, the system compensates for interference. Those corrections show you where the tampering began." It took the tech a second to see it. Then his expression changed. "He's right. If we map the correction pattern—" "Do it," the regulator ordered. The tech's fingers flew across the keys. Lines of code scrolled. Internal maps lit up on screen. Evan observed quietly, reading what the others struggled to parse. The cluster of corrected nodes narrowed. The map zoomed. A location appeared, Conference Room 3. The operations lead frowned. "But that room is empty." Marcus snapped his head toward the hall. "It shouldn't be. That room has a secure terminal." Valeria blinked, realization hitting her like a cold slap. "Someone's in there." Noah grabbed Evan's hand tighter. Evan squeezed back gently, keeping the boy behind him as tension rippled through the room. The regulator motioned to security. "Get down there." Security moved instantly, sprinting toward the hallway that led to the executive conference rooms. The operations center watched the live feed from the corridor camera as the guards pushed open the door to Conference Room 3. The room was empty, completely empty. The secure terminal hummed in the corner, screen filled with cascading code, mid-wipe. The guard's radio crackled. "No suspect inside, terminal running an auto-clean cycle." "Cut power," the regulator ordered. The guard yanked the plug. The terminal darkened. But the damage was done. The cascade had completed its cycle milliseconds before power loss. The evidence was gone. Back in the operations room, the tech's voice broke the silence. "We lost the trace. There's no residue. Whoever did this is either extremely skilled or extremely prepared." Evan watched the frozen screen, eyes narrowing slightly. Someone tried very hard to erase their fingerprints. He didn't raise his voice, but everyone heard him. But systems always leave something behind. You just have to know where to look. Valeria turned to him. desperation flickering behind her controlled expression. "Can you find it?" Now the room waited. Regulators, pilots, technicians, all looking to a janitor like he was the only steady thing in a place built to hold power. Evan studied the remnants of the trace logs. A pattern, faint, nearly invisible, hid beneath the routing map. A distortion so small it wouldn't mean anything to someone unfamiliar with military-grade flight systems, but he recognized it instantly. Someone accessed the system through internal maintenance routing, he said slowly. Not executive, not engineering. Marcus froze. Maintenance? That's impossible. Those terminals aren't authorized for high-level access. Not unless someone modified them, Evans said. The operations lead looked horrified. You think a maintenance credential was elevated by someone inside the executive chain? He didn't answer. He didn't have to, because the room already knew the answer, and they could feel where this was heading. Noah tugged his sleeve again. Dad, does this mean someone tried to hurt people? Evan crouched, steadying the boy with both hands on his shoulders. It means someone tried to hide a mistake, he said softly, and hiding mistakes usually makes things worse. When he stood, the regulator faced him directly. Sir, we will need your help to trace whatever's left. Someone is clearly trying to obstruct this investigation. You're the only one in this building who understands how these systems behave under pressure. Public exposure advanced again, not through spectacle but through reliance. The janitor was now the indispensable expert. Evan nodded once. Show me everything you have. And with that sentence, he stepped fully into the role no one expected, and everyone now needed. The operations center shifted around Evan as if the entire room had quietly agreed he was no longer a visitor in their crisis. He was the axis around which the next decisions would turn. Regulators gathered their notes, technicians pulled data streams onto larger screens, and Marcus stood almost protectively near the monitors, waiting for direction he wasn't used to needing from anyone outside the executive chain. Evan moved through it all with the calm precision of someone who had lived inside high-pressure command systems, not under them. Start with what wasn't touched, he said. Wipes are thorough, but they never hit peripherals in time. Pull the maintenance hub logs. A technician quickly complied. Noah stayed close, one hand gripping the strap of his backpack, watching his father with a strange mixture of pride and worry. The boy knew this version of his father, focused, sharp, quietly commanding, though he had rarely seen it in public. It was a part of Evan's life he had locked away along with the uniform he no longer wore. The maintenance hub logs appeared on the secondary display, columns of time-stamped entries flickering in fast succession. Evan scanned them, face unreadable. Slow it by half, he instructed. Focus on access permissions. The logs slowed. A handful of entries popped out, flagged for unusual authorization levels. Marcus leaned closer. Those shouldn't exist. Maintenance terminals are supposed to be low permission. That's why someone used them, Evan said. If you're trying to hide a breach, you work through the quietest part of the system. The regulator pointed. This one, maintenance route 2B. That elevation spike, could that be the access path? Evan stepped within inches of the screen, analyzing the timing. No, that's a routing correction. Look at the entry 3 lines down. The room quieted as the entry blinked, a subtle, almost elegant elevation patch that shouldn't exist in any maintenance console. There, Evan said. That's the breach. Valeria moved closer, her posture no longer the rigid command stance she carried earlier. This was the posture of someone unraveling a truth she didn't want to face. That timestamp, she whispered. "That's during the investor briefing." Marcus frowned. So, someone elevated the maintenance terminal while we were all in the conference. "Not someone," the regulator said. "Someone with the authority to create the elevation string." Evan nodded. "Only 3 people in cross dynamics can authorize that level of access." The silence thickened. No one said the names out loud. They didn't have to. Before the tension settled further, the door to the operations room opened. A man in a crisp suit, mid-level executive, badge reading Pierce Lawson, entered with an expression too composed for the crisis surrounding him. "Ma'am," he said to Valeria, "I heard there was a system issue. I've been trying to reach you." Marcus stiffened. "Pierce? You weren't in the conference room earlier." Pierce smiled lightly. "I was doing my job, making sure our investors didn't panic." He looked around at the worried faces, then back at his CEO. "Is there a problem?" The regulator moved forward. "Mr. Lawson, we're currently tracing unauthorized escalation attempts. We'll need to speak with every executive who had system access today." Pierce's smile faltered at the edges. "Of course." Evan watched him with quiet observation. He wasn't judging, he was reading. People under pressure revealed themselves in the micro-movements, the twitch of fingers, the blink delay, the breath held too long. Pierce was holding his breath right now. A technician interrupted. "We isolated more data from the maintenance log. Sir," she said, addressing Evan instinctively, "look at this." She expanded a secondary cluster of corrections. Evan saw it instantly. "They used a ghost command." Marcus blinked. "A what?" "A mirrored access request tied to a non-active badge," Evan said. "It's a way to hide who really executed the command." Valeria turned sharply toward Pierce. "Maintenance badge. Ghost command. Pierce, you were responsible for contractor onboarding this quarter." He laughed once, hollow. "Are you suggesting I tampered with the jet?" Evan didn't look away from the screen. "I'm suggesting whoever did this prepared in advance, and they knew the upcoming demonstration was high stakes." Pierce's jaw tightened. "I've been loyal to this company for 9 years." "Loyalty doesn't erase logs," the regulator said. Pierce's composure slipped. Not dramatically, not enough for most people to see, but enough for Evan. He recognized the way a man fights the instinct to flee. But before anyone could press further, the jet's cockpit crew re-entered the operations center. Captain Reyes walked straight toward Evan with a solemn determination. "We've begun post-flight analysis," he said, "and we found something." Everyone turned. He held up a small black box, not the flight recorder, but a secondary, diagnostic cache. "This survived the system scrub," Reyes said, "and it confirms what he nodded at Evan, suspected from the start. He set the device on the console. Evan opened it. Inside was a single printed error signature, the kind that existed before the patch override, the kind that no one expected to survive a wipe. Marcus exhaled shakily. This proves the system was faulty before the flight." "No," Evan corrected softly. "It proves someone knew it was faulty and let the flight proceed anyway." Valeria's hand trembled beside her. "But why? Why risk everything?" The regulator spoke quietly. "Because someone needed the demonstration to succeed at any cost. A failure on the ground can be spun as a glitch. A failure in the air," he paused, "can be blamed on the pilot." Captain Reyes stiffened. "You're saying someone tried to set us up?" Evan closed the diagnostic box. "Someone tried to control the narrative." Noah slipped his hand into his father's again. Evan squeezed gently. The victory strategy edged forward another step. Public exposure was no longer a possibility. It was becoming inevitable. Subscribe with the bell on, because the next part reveals the moment the truth breaks wide open. The diagnostic box sat between them like a detonator, silent, compact, holding the power to blow apart careers, reputations, and every illusion of control that had held the company together that morning. Evan didn't touch it again. He didn't need to. The truth inside it had already begun its work, unraveling whatever story someone at Cross Dynamics had hoped to bury under the runway. Pierce Lawson's composure strained visibly. He shifted his weight, smoothed his tie, forced a thin smile toward Valeria, then toward the regulators, as if reassurance could erase data. It couldn't. Captain Reyes gestured toward the box. This record shows the stabilizer fault existed before pre-flight checks. That means someone signed off a false green light. The regulator nodded grimly. And it means the patch wasn't the cause. It was the cover. A murmur spread across the operations room. Techs, support staff, coordinators exchanging uneasy looks. You could almost hear the pieces clicking into place. Cross Dynamics hadn't suffered an accident. It had suffered sabotage. Valeria moved closer to the console, her expression sharper now, fear tempered by something fiercer. If this is true, someone deliberately endangered my daughter. Her voice didn't rise in volume, but the quiet tremor beneath it was enough to shift the room's temperature. Pierce cleared his throat. "Let's slow down," he said carefully. "We can't make accusations based on a single leftover file." Evan finally looked at him. Not confrontational, just observant. "The device survived because someone forgot to include it in the wipe command," Evan said. "Whoever initiated the rollback didn't know this cache was still active." Pierce swallowed. "That doesn't prove—" "Pierce," Marcus cut in. "You were the one pushing for an earlier demonstration. You said waiting for validation would hurt momentum." "That's not a crime," Pierce snapped. "No," the regulator agreed, "but deploying an unvalidated patch might be." All eyes drifted to the CEO. Valeria didn't blink. "Did you authorize that deployment?" Pierce's jaw flexed. "No." The regulator spoke again. "Did you approve an elevation request for a maintenance terminal?" "No." "Did you initiate a rollback?" Pierce's voice wavered. "No." But his gaze broke first, and that was enough. The operations lead raised a trembling hand. There's more." She clicked a command on her console. Another set of logs appeared, partially damaged, but still readable. "We traced the ghost command to a secondary routing point," she said. "It wasn't supposed to be active. It's an access relay from the old development wing." Marcus frowned. "We shut that setup down months ago." "You did," she said softly, "but someone turned it back on." Evan scanned the readings. The relay was old, outdated, abandoned for newer, more secure architecture. But it had one advantage. It bypassed most oversight tools. Someone had chosen that pathway with intention. "Who still has clearance for the old wing?" Evan asked. Marcus hesitated. "Only senior engineers and executive leadership." The regulator turned toward Valeria. "Ma'am, do you have access to the relay?" "I haven't used it in over a year," she said. "And Mr. Lawson?" Marcus didn't look away from Pierce. He was part of the team that closed the relay. He's one of the few who could bring it back online. Pierce stepped back as if the room had shifted beneath him. "This is insane. You're all chasing shadows." Evan spoke quietly. "Systems. Don't lie, Pierce. People do." Every monitor in the room reflected the same thing. timestamps, access paths, command signatures, all pointing to someone who had planned well enough to hide, but not well enough to hide from someone who understood system behavior more intimately than the system itself. Pierce's mask finally cracked. "You think I wanted the jet to crash?" he snapped. "You think I'd risk every investor relationship I've built?" Valeria's eyes hardened. "I think you wanted the demonstration to succeed so badly you pushed a patch through before it was ready." Evan added, "And when the system showed a fault, you hid it." Pierce's anger shifted to desperation. "This is all circumstantial." But the regulator wasn't finished. "We also checked your terminal history," he said. "Your device pinged to the maintenance relay 5 minutes before the patch deployment." Pierce froze. It was over. Not proven in court, not packaged in legal language, but over in the way truth works long before paperwork catches up. Valeria stepped toward him. "You tampered with my aircraft," she said softly. "You put my daughter at risk." The softness made the accusation heavier. Pierce shook his head rapidly. "This isn't what you think." But then he did the one thing that sealed everything. He turned to run. Security intercepted him before he made it 3 steps toward the hallway. The struggle was brief. An elbow, a stumble, the clatter of a badge on the floor. The room exhaled a collective truth. Guilt doesn't always confess in words. Sometimes it confesses in movement. The regulators took control, escorting Pierce out while reading him his initial rights for obstruction and tampering. He didn't look back at Evan. He couldn't. When the door shut behind them, the room turned and stayed on the man who had done what none of their experts could. The operations lead spoke first. "Evan, without you, we never would have found this." Marcus nodded. "We wouldn't have even known where to look." Captain Reyes added, voice firm, "And we wouldn't be standing here." Valeria stepped forward last. Her voice wasn't commanding. It wasn't dismissive. It wasn't even guarded. It was humbled. "You saved my daughter's life," she said, "and today, you saved this company from collapsing under a lie." Noah stood beside him, pride shining through the remnants of fear. Public exposure was no longer building toward a climax. It had landed, fully, unmistakably, undeniably. And the man they mocked had become the center of the storm they couldn't navigate without him. For a long, suspended moment after Pierce was escorted out, the operations center felt like the eye of a storm, calm only because everything had already been torn open. The regulators spoke quietly among themselves, preparing the next steps. Technicians stood in weary clusters, some relieved, some shaken, all of them processing the reality that their near disaster had been orchestrated by one of their own leaders. And in the middle of all of it, unmoving, steady, quietly watching, stood Evan. Not the janitor they saw this morning, not the man they dismissed behind polite smiles, but the one whose insight had just shaped the investigation, directed the crisis response, and prevented a tragedy none of them could have survived with their conscience intact. Valeria approached him slowly, almost cautiously, like someone approaching the one person she'd underestimated too profoundly to recover from in a single breath. Her daughter stayed behind, hands clasped, eyes burning with gratitude she didn't know how to voice. "Evan," Valeria said quietly, "I need to speak with you privately." He met her gaze, calm, controlled, not hostile, not deferential, just unshakably present. "Is this about the investigation?" "It's about responsibility," she said, "and about what I failed to see." He didn't respond, not immediately. People who worked under powerful figures learned the value of silence, not as submission, but as judgment. Valeria gestured toward the adjacent briefing room. "Please." He nodded once to Noah. "Stay here with Captain Reyes. I'll be right back." Noah squeezed his arm, but didn't object. The boy could tell the moment carried weight. Inside the glass-walled briefing room, sunlight cut across the polished table, illuminating stacks of flight reports and abandoned briefing notes from earlier that morning. The chaos of the day had left the space untouched, almost frozen in the last moment of normalcy before everything fell apart. Valeria closed the door behind them. For the first time all day, she allowed herself to sit. "You knew what was happening in that system before anyone else did," she said. Not as accusation, but confession. "You understood a failure that my entire engineering division didn't grasp." Evan remained standing. "I worked with similar architectures," he said, "before this job." Her eyes shifted. "You were military." It wasn't a question, it was recognition. "Air Force test pilot," he confirmed, "and engineering specialist." Valeria inhaled sharply. "Why are you here? Why are you cleaning floors in my terminal?" Most people ask that question with disbelief or scorn. She asked with something different, something almost fragile. "Because my son needs stability," he said, "and predictable hours, and a life without the risks I used to take." She nodded slowly, understanding more in that sentence than she expected. "Evan," she said, folding her hands, "I owe you an apology, a personal one. The way I spoke to you this morning—" "You don't need to apologize," he said, cutting her off gently. "Yes," she insisted, "I do." She stood again. "I misjudged you. I treated you as less because of the uniform you were wearing. And now I know that uniform doesn't reflect your competence or your value." He didn't answer, but the weight of her words settled between them. She took a slow breath. "The regulators will want you involved moving forward. They're already calling you the stabilizing influence in this investigation. They said your analysis was indispensable." "That's their choice," he said. "No," she replied, "it's yours." For the first time, her tone shifted, not CEO to subordinate, not authority to labor, but one professional to another. "I want you on an internal special review team," she said, "consulting directly with engineering, safety oversight, and regulators until this is resolved. Compensation will be appropriate. Schedule flexible for your son." He studied her for a moment. Not suspicious, simply weighing honesty. "I didn't help for a job," he said. She shook her head. "I didn't offer one out of pity. I offered it because you're the only person who saw the truth today." Silence settled again, deeper this time. Then she asked the question that was harder for her than the apology. "Will you consider it?" Before he could answer, a sound cut through the quiet. A knock. Lena stood at the door, hesitant but determined. "Mom, they want you back in the operations center. The regulators said there are press inquiries." Valeria closed her eyes briefly, collecting herself. When she looked at Evan again, her expression carried new clarity. "Whatever you choose," she said, "you have my respect and my gratitude." They stepped out together, an image none of the staff expected to see, the CEO walking beside the janitor she mocked, with no trace of condescension left. As they entered the operations center, conversations halted, not out of shock, but out of recognition. Captain Reyes approached them immediately. "The press is assembling at the hangar," he said. "They're asking who resolved the control failure. Someone leaked that our recovery came from outside the engineering division." Valeria stared at him. "Leaked?" Reyes nodded. "Someone's trying to control the narrative." Marcus added, tone grim, and they're trying to make it sound like luck, not skill. The regulator looked at Evan. Sir, the safest way to avoid misinformation is for you to give a technical summary on record. Valeria agreed, not with hesitation but conviction. You should speak. You're the only one who can explain what happened without spin. Noah rushed to his father's side, gripping his sleeve. Dad, you don't have to if you don't want to. Evan knelt and placed a hand on the boy's cheek. I know. Then he stood, facing the regulators, the press waiting, the company that had dismissed him, the truth he could no longer hide, and the reversal he never asked for. He nodded once. I'll speak. And with that, the victory strategy advanced to its next inevitable phase. Public exposure. Full, undeniable, and unavoidable. Flashbulbs popped the moment Evan stepped into the hangar, the kind of chaotic strobe that normally framed CEOs, pilots in decorated uniforms, or scientists unveiling new breakthroughs. Not men in janitor badges. Not single dads who mopped floors before dawn and folded their sons' school shirts at night. But the press had already heard fragments. Pilot saved by maintenance worker, civilian intervenes in mid-air crisis. Unidentified expert halts catastrophic failure. And now every camera swiveled toward him, compelled by a story that practically wrote itself. Regulators formed a loose semicircle behind him. Marcus hovered nearby, eyes bouncing between reporters and the diagnostic box still clutched in Captain Reyes's hands. Valeria stood a few steps back, not overshadowing him, not commanding the frame, watching with a composure rebuilt from humility, not ego. Her daughter stood beside her, hands clasped, tightly together. Microphones extended like drawn spears. A reporter fired the first question. Sir, can you state your name and your role in today's emergency? Evan didn't flinch. My name is Evan Holt. I work as a janitor at the Northbridge Executive Terminal. A wave of murmurs swept the crowd. Another reporter called out, louder. And yet, you intervened in the CDX-9 failure. How? I recognized the failure pattern, he said simply, and I acted. What qualifications do you have to make those decisions? A woman asked sharply. He didn't posture, he didn't dramatize. I served as an Air Force test pilot and aerospace systems engineer. I worked with early models of hybrid stabilizer systems similar to the CDX-9. What happened today was something I've seen before and knew how to correct. Gasps, clicking shutters, a ripple of stunned acknowledgement. A man near the front stepped forward. Are you saying cross-dynamics engineers didn't detect the issue? Evan shook his head. This wasn't a standard failure. It was hidden behind an override command. The team here is made up of highly skilled professionals, but the system wasn't telling them the truth. That landed heavily. A second reporter seized the opening. Is it true the fault existed before the flight? Yes, Evan said, because the truth didn't need embellishment. And is it true the system was deliberately wiped? Regulators stepped forward, prepared to intervene, but Evan beat them to it. Yes, he said. Someone initiated a rollback from inside Cross Dynamics. Someone with elevated access. An audible crackle of shock traveled through the press line. Are you implying sabotage? A reporter pressed. I'm stating facts, he replied. The evidence shows an unauthorized patch was pushed before the demonstration and hidden behind an artificial green light. When the system began failing, someone tried to erase those records. The reporters erupted with overlapping questions. Who was responsible? Was anyone arrested? Is the CDX-9 program safe? Did the company know? Evan lifted a hand, not commanding silence but asking for it, and surprisingly the room quieted. "This isn't about blaming all of cross dynamics," he said. "Many people here acted with integrity and urgency, but one individual abused their access, and one individual alone is responsible for what nearly happened." Behind him, the regulators nodded. "And the only reason we discovered it," Captain Reyes added loudly, "is because this man saw the system's truth before any of us could." A reporter turned to Valeria. "Ma'am, is this accurate? Did a janitor rescue your flagship project?" Valeria stepped forward, not in front of Evan, but beside him. "Yes," she said, voice steady. "Evan Holt prevented a catastrophic failure. He saved the crew. He saved my daughter. And he saved this company from a far greater disaster." She looked at him directly. "And earlier today, I misjudged him. That mistake is on me." The press froze. CEOs apologized to no one. Certainly not janitors. Another question cut in. "Ms. Cross, what will happen now?" Valeria answered without hesitation. "A full internal and external review. And going forward, Mr. Holt will be working directly with our oversight team. His insight was indispensable today." More murmurs. Some reporters turned their cameras from Valeria to Evan again, as though the narrative itself demanded realignment. One reporter angled closer. "Mr. Holt, why did you step in? You weren't required to. You weren't trained for this facility. You weren't even supposed to be in the operations center." Evan glanced at Noah, standing between the regulators and Reyes. "For my son," he said quietly. "For everyone on that jet, for anyone who trusts technology with their lives." He looked straight into the cameras. "You act when you see something wrong. You don't wait for permission." That line landed with the force of truth sharpened by experience. More questions surged, but regulators stepped forward. "We'll take it from here," one announced. The briefing ended with the same intensity it began. Rapid questions, jostling cameras, security ushering people toward designated exits. But no one left without glancing back at him. Noah rushed toward his father as soon as the crowd thinned. "Dad!" He threw his arms around Evan's waist. Evan knelt, enveloping him in a steady, grounding embrace. Valeria approached them slowly. "Evan, thank you for speaking." He stood, facing her with the same calm presence that had guided every moment of the crisis. "People needed the truth. And you gave it," she said. She hesitated. "I hope you'll stay through the investigation. After that, we'll talk about what comes next." Evan nodded once. Not a commitment, not a rejection. Just a quiet acknowledgement. The operations staff watched as he walked Noah out of the hangar. Their expressions weren't pity or awe or relief, they were respect. Earned the hard way, exposed the public way. And the victory strategy pushed to its final phase. Justice within reach, dignity restored, and the entire world watching the man they had once dismissed walk away as the only one who never lost control. The walk out of the hangar wasn't loud or triumphant. It was quiet, almost strangely calm, like the world itself needed a moment to understand what had shifted. Evan held Noah's hand as they crossed the tarmac toward the service corridor, the same path they'd taken that morning when the CEO had ordered security to remove them from sight. Hours ago, this stretch of concrete had been the boundary between power and invisibility. Now, it felt like a bridge. They reached the corridor entrance and stepped inside the cool, dim hallway. The hum of ventilation filled the silence. Noah looked up at his father, eyes still bright with everything he'd witnessed. "Dad," he whispered, "does this mean everything's going to change?" Evan brushed a hand over his son's hair. Maybe not everything, but enough. And that was true, because while the world outside scrambled to reshape its narrative, Inside the operations center, people were still talking about him, not as a witness, not as a janitor, but as the man whose clarity had saved lives and exposed the truth. The regulators were preparing statements, the engineering team was recalibrating, and the CEO, she was following them. Valeria caught up at the doorway, slowing her pace as if approaching unfamiliar terrain. She didn't demand attention. She didn't bark instructions. She simply stopped in front of them, her daughter quiet behind her. "Evan," she said softly, "I wanted to speak before you left." He turned, steady, unguarded. "What do you need?" She took a breath, the kind that signaled a decision made after wrestling with pride. "I spoke with the regulators. They want you officially contracted as a technical consultant until the investigation concludes. I'd like to extend that offer formally, full pay, full access, and full authority on safety operations." He studied her. "And after the investigation?" "That's up to you," she said. "But I hope you'll consider staying longer. We need people like you, people who see what others miss." She didn't say the rest. People who won't lie to protect a system that should serve the truth. But he heard it anyway. Before he responded, Lena stepped forward slightly, voice small but steady. "Thank you for saving me," she said, "and everyone else." Noah squeezed his father's hand harder, proud and silent. Evan nodded once. "You're welcome." Valeria exhaled, tension leaving her shoulders. "Whatever choice you make," she said, "I want you to know was wrong this morning. And I'm not looking for forgiveness, just a chance to do better." He didn't offer absolution. He didn't dismiss her either. "Then start with honesty," he said, "for your team, for the regulators, for yourself." She held his gaze. "I will." They parted there, not as adversaries, not even as equals, but as individuals who had both been reshaped by the same moment. The CEO walked back toward the hangar with her daughter. Evan and Noah continued down the corridor. When they reached the end of the hallway, Noah tugged his hand. "Dad, will you take the job?" Evan let out a slow breath. "What do you think?" "I think," Noah said carefully, "you were happier today than I've seen you in a long time. Even when things were scary." Evan smiled, soft, honest. "Yeah," he said, "I guess I was." They stepped out into the sunlight, the wind carrying the faint scent of jet fuel and change. The jet sat in the distance, technicians moving around it like caretakers tending to a wounded creature. Reporters lingered near the fence line, talking animatedly about the man who'd appeared from nowhere to save the day. But Evan didn't look back, because some victories didn't need applause. They only needed truth, and truth had already done its work. As they walked toward the parking lot, he felt Noah leaning against him, not out of fear, but out of pride. That feeling grounded him in a way no title or recognition ever could. He paused before unlocking the car, letting the moment settle. They had come here for a medical shuttle appointment. They had returned carrying the weight of an entire company's future, and the possibility of their own. "Ready to go home?" he asked. "Yeah," Noah said. "But I think you should take that job." Evan chuckled quietly. "We'll talk about it." He opened the car door for his son, the simple motion grounding him back into the life he had built out of necessity, sacrifice, and love. A life that might be shifting again, this time not out of loss, but out of opportunity. When he closed the door and walked around to the driver's side, he glanced one last time at the massive hangar behind them. Not with resentment, with understanding. A world that once refused to see him had just been forced to. And the man they mocked had walked away with his dignity not just intact, but undeniable. Subscribe and don't miss our next story. Trust me, you'll feel it. And tell me in the comments, what injustice should we tackle next?